Hi. Oh, not going the wrong way. Oh, there we go. Okay. I subtitled this "More You Ever Wanted to Know About Ffmpeg," and that's actually maybe a poor topic for this because I've only got 2 slides in there, thankfully, which actually show any Ffmpeg. Maybe this is kind of more like encoding a cautionary tale, because so just a little bit about my background. Within Disney Imagineering, I do a lot of work with outside companies where we're doing reviews with producers that may be in-house, but we're getting content from out of house. Trying to get content encoded and getting it to someone to review on their Mac or their PC is not easy, and I discovered why it's not so easy and why I keep getting calls at the 11th hour to say, why does my color not match my original source media? This kind of boiled out of the Open Review Initiative. It's been a great forum for just getting people that are interested in these topics and getting cross collaboration between different companies, because I definitely learned more on this topic than I ever thought I wanted to know. So what we're trying to do with this is just try and come up with some good standards on if I'm trying to do a review, the things I really care about are what the color fidelity is. I don't want the color to drift. I want it to be as close to the original as I possibly can. I want to minimize encoding artifacts, and I'm not trying to make some beautifully, minimally, IO intensive thing. If I can pick some beautiful standard that works for a whole show, that makes my life easier, and that's kind of what I'm aiming for. And another crucial part is we're building this all on top of the great work of OpenColor.io. So the part I'm talking about is just that part on the right, where in theory, all I'm trying to do is take what OpenColor.io delivers to me and ideally represent it in an encoded movie as identically as possible, which unfortunately is harder than it should be. And actually, I realize I'm going to be slamming Ffmpeg a lot, but I've got to be honest that without Ffmpeg, our lives would be way harder. So, kudos to open source. We're an open source forum. It's a great tool. It's just there's way too much in it for its own good. So, as I said up here, it's very easy to get a poor encode, and the documentation is cryptic at best. So I managed with Kevin Wheatley to find a Ffmpeg whisperer who taught me the voodoo. So if you happen to go to like the Autodesk ShotGrid website and look up like how would I encode my clip of PNG files for ShotGrid, you get a Ffmpeg command which looks like this, which is sadly wrong. So an illustration of that, this is a slide that Rick Sayer actually, an image Rick Sayer gave me. So this is the original PNG source. This is what Ffmpeg would do with that Ffmpeg command. So it's pretty bad straight out the gate, and that's because by default it's encoding for BT601, and I'm showing my age in that I know what that is because I'm that old. That's from standard def way back in the 80s and 90s or earlier. So this is what I was using before I met Kevin. So there is a cryptic flag you can put in there which tells it to use BT 709. So you're getting a bit closer. It's definitely an improvement, but Kevin actually showed me this one, which actually gets us very close. I mean, down to different, minor differences. In fact, if we look at the YUV 444 signal and compare it to the original, we're pretty back to kind of identical. So, this is a good illustration of why this is kind of important. This is just Ffmpeg doing the raw encoding. Now, things get even more squirrely when you start trying to take that image and display it on a web browser. There's this beautiful thing called ICC profiles that exist for PNG files, where you can kind of say, this is how I want this image to be represented when I display it on some strange device. And this works really well because our laptops are starting to get really good at displaying outside like an sRGB color gamut, or HDR displays and all those kind of good things. So in theory, MP4 files have lots of nice flags for telling you that it's kind of like the equivalent of the ICC profiles. The problem is the web browsers don't seem to look at it, and I'll show you some examples. So I'm really just going to, for brevity, I'm just going to really talk about the transfer function. So these are examples within the Ffmpeg 4 spec of some of the transfer functions. That top one is the most misleading one because A, that's the default, but B, it's wrong. You'll see it actually says it's the camera gamma, not the display gamma. So what we used to is when you talk about BT709, that's we're expecting a gamma of 2.4. It's actually displaying a gamma of 1.95, which is, or roughly 1.95, which is pretty way off. And there isn't actually anything in the spec for displaying a gamma of 2.4. So for all those studios out there, and there's a lot of them that like using gamma 2.4, you're kind of screwed straight out the gate. Now, just to make it visually a little bit more interesting, so let's illustrate some of these. So this is, start off with a gray ramp in the PNG file. Now, this is what an ICC profile would do to just applying different gammas. You can see the gammas down the left-hand side that I'm trying to apply. So ICC profiles do a pretty good job. I think this was actually done in Chrome. This is what Firefox does. It basically ignores those gammas completely. So this is doing the same. It should look like this. This is what Firefox does to it, so pretty terrible. And this is pretty consistent across Firefox and all platforms as far as I can tell. I have heard people see somewhat different results. There is a plugin that ILM has worked on to ideally get a result close to this, but I haven't quite figured out exactly what it's doing. So Chrome does something like this, which is kind of close to the original. I'll show you some examples later. The problem is Chrome on OS X does something completely different. And that's because it's using the OS X color management tools. So bizarrely, the one which is actually the closest is the linear MP4, which of course nobody uses because it's just weird. But the one which actually is pretty good is sRGB, and that's pretty consistent across the map. The one which is actually the nicest is, Safari OS X is actually the same because it's using the same underlibraries for MP4s. There's some nice workarounds that you can do only on Safari and only on OS X, where you can actually, if you use a QuickTime file rather than MP4, you can actually tell it to use explicitly a gamma. And that, so this is just explicitly putting in the gamma that I'm expecting. So that sort of shows how far off OS X is in trying to interpret that. And I mean, I'm slamming the Mac in every other respect does a phenomenal job at color management, unlike Windows. But this is one area where it kind of sucks. And this is what we're hoping to actually see. So with that final result, we get pretty good, but with the regular MP4s, it's kind of terrible. So it's kind of web review is kind of a complete mess. Your best bet is sRGB, or there is actually another flag I didn't actually show up here, which just says ignore it completely. And in some cases, if you've got a managed pipeline, if you know what you're doing, it can be pretty good. I think I guess one of the things when I started this, I was hoping I'd end up with one beautiful answer of, you should use X, and this would be the standard we're trying to pronounce. And when I started talking to Kevin, it was, every question I had is, well, it depends. And I think I've come to the conclusion it does depend on your situation. If you're dealing with a client that only works on Mac, you can have a nice answer. If you're dealing with customers that only work on Windows, you've got maybe a different answer. So it does depend. So a lot of what this project is trying to be about is educating people on what are the options you may want to choose and why you might want to choose them. There's too many things on the web where it's just use this magic secret thing, and what we're trying to do is get behind that and educate you on why you might make certain decisions. So again, this is super cryptic, but that is the kind of correct answer in many cases, but again, it depends. So we've done a lot of work over the last year, and we've developed a set of web pages which go in detail on all the different kind of ways you might want to do encoding, why you want to choose different things. We are literally in the process hoping to actually have it properly ingested into the Academy website. And the Git repo is currently in the Academy website, but the web pages are not live. We hope to get that done in the next day or two, but it's really close. I'll give you the URL at the end of this. The other part I just jumped on. So one of the things that we thought would be really useful is trying to wedge certain parameters. So these are like 3 graphs of just trying to wedge the CRF flag of H.264 against encoding time, file size, or the VMAF flag thing. VMAF, if you're not familiar with it, is a phenomenal kind of metric that Netflix has come up with of a way of encoding, comparing 2 different encoded images, and so you can at least get a good sense of, for the way a golden eyes user would look at something, how good is that image kind of look. So these kind of graphs are super useful. So Daniel Flenaheen has been working on a sort of benchmarking a tool that allows us to very easily compare different parameters against each other and graph the results. But we can also use this in a variety of other ways. So one of the things that I discovered is that in the web pages I was creating, I actually had errors in some of the lines. So we've actually got tools for extracting any kind of full Ffmpeg commands out of there and creating a test suite around that to make sure that anything I'm putting in there is actually creating the same results. The other part of that is also, as Ffmpeg releases new versions, sometimes they break things. So we want to have a way that as new Ffmpeg releases come out, that we can confirm that our recommendations are still good. Another big part of that test suite is also just trying to identify open content that we can use in those test suites. So this was actually, I was actually pointed to the Open Content Netflix library by the DeepL group. So what I've done is some of these clips are super long. I try to end up with just some simple extracts of around about 200 frames to do these some of these kind of encoding profiles. Now, one of the ones I'm also trying to do is to make sure that we've got HDR footage as well, because that's an area that we're trying to explore into. We're definitely not there yet. The other part of the pain part is just making sure you've got a clean build of OpenImageIO, OpenColorIO, and Ffmpeg. So we've actually got Docker containers to try and get you hopefully a reasonably complete test framework that you can run those test containers from too. The stuff we're really trying to work on, and we're really looking for help in these areas, is anything helping us with HDR specs. We're seeing a lot of people out there starting to require that they're creating content in HDR, but there's not clear ways of how do you encode for HDR, and what are the preferred codecs or HDR specs to do that with. And similarly, we really just, in terms of codecs and cells, we've really just been using H.264 and ProRes so far. We want to expand the test suites out to include any codecs, and we're actually very open to suggestions as to which ones we really should be looking at. It would be great also if you're interested in trying to use the test suite and give us feedback on it's a pretty flexible framework to at least experiment with different parameters. So it would be, please give us feedback on that as well. And I think lastly, I guess it's more feedback, but the actual documentation itself, I'm not. I guess when I was back at school, English was my least favorite subject, and now in my old age, I'm finding I'm writing English, having to write English more and more. So, you know, giving me feedback on what's not clear would be great. You know, I definitely want to make sure that the documentation is as accessible as possible. So take a look through it and please give me feedback. And also feedbacks for other areas that are missing. You know, Ffmpeg is very dense. We're not trying to be the authoritative source of all Ffmpeg documentation. We're just trying to be the documentation for what does the VFX community need for encoding from frames to MP4 files. And I want to thank this group of people, in particular Daniel Fennerheen and Kevin Wheatley, and Eric also for just coordinating the ORI team. That it's been a great forum for us. I would not have met any of these other people without it, and the rest of the team has helped me enormously in just giving me feedback. And so the URL at the top is the current active website. As I said earlier, we're hoping that to be in its final resting place on the Academy GitHub repo imminently. Thank you very much.